Why did Germany, in the midst of the cataclysm of WW2, become obsessed with building the biggest, most powerful tanks the world had ever seen? This is not just a story of engineering or battlefield encounters. It is a story of a profound and fatal misallocation, a lethal obsession that looks like strength, but contains the very seeds of defeat. The path from the humble Panzer I to the monstrous 70-ton King Tiger is a path that mirrors the strategic delusions of the Third Reich itself. In WW2, Germany perfected the art of building perfect weapons for a war they were destined to lose. This is the story of technological hubris, of winning battles but losing campaigns, of how the pursuit of qualitative superiority can be utterly overwhelmed by the ruthless arithmetic of mass production, combined arms, and total war. We will trace this journey, from the blitzkrieg triumphs fueled by light, fast tanks to the grinding stalemate on the Eastern Front that triggered a desperate arms race in armor and firepower, a race that consumed German resources at a staggering rate. We will see how the very design philosophy of German tanks, their complexity, their over-engineering, their insatiable demand for rare materials and skilled labor, became a critical vulnerability in the total war of WW2. We will analyze the battles where these behemoths proved their terrifying worth, and the far more numerous moments where they sat idle, broken down, waiting for parts that would never come, as the tides of simpler, more reliable Allied and Soviet tanks washed around them. The narrative of German tank development in WW2 is a masterclass in how a nation can excel tactically yet fail operationally and strategically. It is a story of brilliant engineers answering the wrong questions perfectly, while their enemies, the Soviets, the Americans, the British, focused on answering the right questions adequately and in overwhelming numbers. By the end, we will understand that Germany did not lose WW2 because it built big tanks. Rather, building ever bigger, more complex tanks was a symptom of the deeper sickness that guaranteed its defeat, a failure to grasp the industrial, logistical, and economic nature of modern total war. The Panther, the Tiger, the King Tiger, they were magnificent machines, but they were also steel coffins for a flawed strategy, draining the German war machine of the very vitality it needed to survive. So let's delve into the origins of this obsession, back to the beginning, when German armor was small, nimble, and revolutionary. The story begins not with giants, but with dwarfs. In the clandestine years following WW1, the Versailles Treaty forbade Germany from developing tanks. But the German military mind, particularly figures like Heinz Guderian, was captivated by the theoretical potential of armored warfare, not as infantry support, but as an independent, decisive striking force. They studied the lessons of WW1, not the stalemate, but the brief moments of breakthrough, and envisioned a way to restore movement to the battlefield. This intellectual foundation, laid in the 1920s, was crucial. It wasn't just about tanks, it was about a new doctrine, a new way of war. When Hitler came to power, he saw in these theories the perfect tool for his wars of conquest, the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. He provided the resources, and more importantly, the political will to turn theory into a terrifying reality. The first tanks of the reborn Panzerwaffe were anything but imposing. The Panzer I was a mere training tank, little more than a machine gun carrier born from secret designs disguised as agricultural tractors. The Panzer II was only slightly better, a reconnaissance vehicle with a 20 cannon. Even the early models of the Panzer III, designed as the primary tank fighter, and the Panzer IV, conceived as a support tank, were modest in size and firepower by later WW2 standards. Their genius was not in individual might, but in how they were used, and in the revolutionary command and control systems they employed. Every German tank had a radio, a simple fact that gave them a colossal advantage in coordination over many of their early opponents. In the Blitzkrieg, tanks were the spearhead of a combined arms team, closely integrated with mobile infantry in half-tracks, self-propelled artillery, and crucially, tactical air power in the form of the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, acting as flying artillery. The goal was not to engage in protracted slugging matches, but to achieve rapid, paralyzing breakthroughs, race into the enemy's rear, and dislocate their command and supply networks. For this, reliability, speed, and strategic mobility, the ability to move long distances under their own power without breaking down were paramount. And it worked spectacularly. Poland fell in 1939 in a matter of weeks. France, despite possessing technically superior tanks in many cases, like the heavy Char B1 or the well-armed SOMUA S-35, was utterly defeated in 6 weeks in 1940. The French and British tanks were often scattered, poorly coordinated, and used in penny packets. The German panzer divisions, though their tanks were lighter, were concentrated and wielded with surgical precision. The myth of German armored invincibility was born, but this success planted a dangerous seed, an overconfidence in tactical and operational brilliance as a substitute for long-term strategic and industrial planning. Germany entered WW2 with an army designed for short, sharp campaigns, a Blitzarmy asterisk, not the global, attritional war of production it would soon face. The early victories masked a fragile industrial base and a leadership that believed future wars could be won quickly, avoiding the total mobilization that had strained Germany to breaking point in WW1. This foundational miscalculation would echo through every subsequent decision. And the first real, earth-shattering shock to this system came not in the West, but in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the East. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, was the pivot upon which the entire narrative of German tank development turned. Initially, the Blitzkrieg tactics seemed to work again, netting staggering numbers of prisoners and capturing vast territories. The standard German tanks, the upgunned Panzer III with a 15 cannon and the Panzer IV with its short 75, could handle most Soviet tanks like the BT series and the T-26. But then, in the autumn mud and winter snows of 1941, the Germans encountered something new and terrifying. First came the Kliment Voroshilov, the KV-1, a heavy tank that seemed almost impervious to standard German anti-tank guns. Stories abound of single KV-1s holding up entire divisions for days, their armor shrugging off countless hits. Then came the T-34. For German tank crews and commanders, it was a profound trauma. Here was a medium tank with beautifully sloped armor that deflected shots, a wide track that mastered the infamous Russian asterisk Rasputitsa mud, a powerful 76.2 gun that could penetrate any German tank at combat ranges, and it was fast, reliable, and most alarmingly, produced in staggering numbers. The T-34 was a holistic design triumph, born from a Soviet philosophy that emphasized manufacturability, ease of maintenance, and overall combat effectiveness over refined perfection. It was a sobering lesson in strategic design. The T-34 wasn't just a good tank. It was the right tank for the war the Soviet Union was fighting, a war of scale, attrition, and brutal environmental challenges. The psychological impact on the German army was profound. They had believed in their inherent technical, tactical, and even racial superiority, and suddenly they were facing a machine that was, in many key aspects, better than anything they had. This T-34 shock triggered a panic reaction at the highest levels. The ongoing, evolutionary development of German tanks was thrown out the window in favor of a revolutionary leap. The immediate, desperate demand from the front was for a direct counter, a tank that could definitively defeat the T-34 and KV-1 at long range, with armor that could withstand their guns. The German engineering culture, steeped in a tradition of precision, technical excellence, and a belief in the qualitative supremacy of the German soldier and his machine, responded not with a pragmatic copy, but with an over-answer. They would not merely match the T-34, they would surpass it utterly in every measurable metric of firepower and protection. The quest for qualitative, one-on-one superiority became an overriding, almost doctrinal imperative, blinding them to the quantitative and logistical realities of WW2. Out of this crucible of fear, hubris, and shattered assumptions, the first of the true big cats was conceived, the Tiger. The Panzer VI Tiger I was a direct, urgent response to the Eastern Front crisis. Its specification was brutal and simple. Mount the formidable 88 kW K-36 gun, derived from the legendary Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun that had already proven devastating against tanks in ground roles, onto a heavily armored chassis. The development was rushed under personal pressure from Hitler. Henschel and Porsche competed, and the Henschel design won, though Porsche's failed prototype would later find bizarre afterlife as the Ferdinand/Elephant tank destroyer. When the Tiger I debuted in combat near Leningrad in the autumn of 1942, its effect was seismic. At ranges of 1,500 meters or more, where German Panzer IIIs and IVs could not scratch the front of a T-34 or KV-1, the Tiger's 88 could punch straight through them with terrifying ease. Its thick, flat armor, 100 mm on the front, made it a near-impenetrable bunker on tracks to most Soviet guns at standard combat ranges. In defensive situations, in the hands of expert crews like those of the Waffen-SS or elite Heer units, it was a killing machine of unparalleled efficiency. German propaganda seized on it, creating an aura of invincibility. Allied and Soviet reports spoke of Tiger phobia, where any German tank was reported as a Tiger, paralyzing advances. But the Tiger's fearsome reputation, carefully cultivated and often deserved in tactical terms, masked crippling flaws that were systemic to the new German tank philosophy. It was monstrously heavy at over 50 tons, a weight that strained every component from the complex, prone-to-failure transmission to the final drives. It was incredibly complex to build, requiring extensive machining and hand-fitting. Its overlapping road wheel suspension, while providing a smooth ride, was a maintenance nightmare, especially in the mud, ice, and grit of the Russian winter. Frozen mud could pack between the wheels and freeze solid, immobilizing the vehicle. Its fuel consumption was prodigious. A Tiger might get less than half a mile to the gallon, a critical flaw for an army whose logistical lines were stretched over thousands of miles and under constant partisan attack. Most damningly, it was built in tiny numbers. Only 1,347 Tiger IS were built during all of WW2. Compare that to over 84,000 T-34s of all variants, or nearly 50,000 American M4 Shermans. The Tiger was a wonder weapon in the most literal sense. You wondered where they were, because there were never enough of them. It was a battalion-level asset, a precious resource hoarded by high command and rushed from crisis point to crisis point, a tactical firefighter. It could win local engagements. It could create legends like Michael Wittmann's ambush at Villers Bocage, but it could not stem the operational tide. The Tiger represented the new German dilemma in microcosm. It was a magnificent solution to a tactical problem that, in its very existence and use, exacerbated Germany's strategic weaknesses. While a Tiger might destroy 5, 10, or even more enemy tanks, its loss was irreplaceable, both in the machine and, often, in its highly trained, veteran crew. This was not a sustainable model for winning a war of attrition. It was the model for losing one gloriously. If the Tiger was the rushed, heavy answer, the Panther was intended to be the mature, mainstream medium tank solution that would replace the Panzer IV. Officially designated a medium tank, the Panzer V Panther was another, more studied child of the T-34 shock. In 1942, a special Panzer Commission was sent to the front to examine captured T-34s. They were deeply impressed by the sloped armor, the wide tracks, and the general layout. But again, the German propensity for over-engineering, for adding complexity and improvement, took over. The Panther ended up weighing as much as a contemporary Allied heavy tank, around 45 tons, armed with a long, high-velocity 75 kW K-42 gun that was arguably the best tank gun of WW2 in terms of penetration, and protected by very thick, well-sloped frontal armor that was virtually impervious to frontal attack at anything but point-blank range. On paper, and in ideal conditions, it was perhaps the finest all-around tank of the war. But its baptism of fire at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943 was a catastrophic disaster. Rushed into combat prematurely by Hitler's insistence, the approximately 200 Panthers deployed suffered from rampant teething problems. Final drives, designed for a 30-ton vehicle, failed under the Panther's unexpected weight. Engine compartment seals failed, leading to engine fires. The sight of dozens of brand-new Panthers burning or immobilized by breakdowns on the first day of the greatest tank battle in history was a stark portent. Once these issues were partially rectified in later models, the Panther did become a formidable opponent, feared by Allied tankers on all fronts. Its gun could slice through the front of a Sherman or T-34 at distances where they could not effectively reply. Yet, its flaws were baked into its complex design. It was another maintenance-intensive, fuel-thirsty beast. Its side armor was relatively thin, making it vulnerable to flanking attacks and infantry anti-tank weapons. Its production, though higher than the Tiger's at about 6,000 units, was still a fraction of Allied output. The Soviets built more T-34s in 1943 alone than Germany built Panthers in the entire war. The Panther exemplified the German pivot, abandoning the balanced, mobile, and strategically mobile philosophy of the early war panzers for a quest for individual tank supremacy. It was a superb dueling tank, designed to dominate the open, long-range killing fields of the East. But WW2 was not a duel. It was a sprawling, chaotic, multidimensional brawl where numbers, logistics, reliability, and the ability to be everywhere mattered as much as gun penetration on a data sheet. The Panther's complexity meant it spent a disproportionate amount of its life in the workshop or waiting for parts. A tank that is broken down is no tank at all. It is a static, expensive pillbox. This relentless pursuit of technical perfection in a vacuum came at the cost of strategic sanity. Every man-hour spent hand-fitting parts for a Panther's intricate transmission, every ton of special molybdenum alloy steel consumed by its hardened armor, every scarce rubber tire for its intricate interleaved road wheels, was a resource not spent on building more Panzer IVs, more assault guns, more trucks, or more anti-tank guns. As Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, later noted, the German tank industry was, in effect, producing museum pieces while the enemy was producing war-winning tools by the tens of thousands. The Panther was the embodiment of a system optimizing for the wrong variable. To fully grasp the tragedy, we must zoom out from the drawing boards and battlefields to the industrial landscape of total war. Germany never fully mobilized its economy for total war until far too late, partly due to Hitler's fear of civilian discontent and a belief in short wars. When Speer rationalized and centralized production after 1942, output did increase dramatically in a so-called armaments miracle. However, the fundamental choice of what asterisk to produce was fatally skewed by the tactical demands of the front and the ideological obsession with qualitative wonder weapons. The American approach, embodied by the M4 Sherman, was one of cold, industrial logic, standardization, simplicity, and mass production across multiple factories. The Sherman was reliable, easy to build by the tens of thousands using automotive production methods, and easy to repair and ship across oceans. It was a platform good enough to do the job when supported by overwhelming numbers, artillery, tactical air supremacy, and excellent logistics. The US understood that replaceability was a feature. Losing a Sherman was unfortunate, but not catastrophic. Another would take its place, and the crew might survive to fight again. The Soviet approach was even more ruthless and focused. The T-34 was constantly simplified for production, moving from a complex welded turret to a simpler, faster-to-produce hexagonal cast one, removing non-essential features like the early model's fragile commander's cupola. Factories like the legendary Tankograd in the Urals churned them out like tractors, which, in a sense, they were durable, simple, effective machines for a brutal job. In stark contrast, German tank plants, even under Speer, remained artisans' workshops compared to the Allied assembly lines. The big cats used expensive, labor-intensive manufacturing processes. The Tiger's armor plates required massive forging presses. The Panther's sophisticated Maybach engine and complex ZF transmission demanded precision machining and scarce skilled labor. There was little standardization between types. A Tiger part could not fit a Panther, which could not fit a Panzer IV. This chaos in production and logistics was a direct enemy to output and sustainment. Furthermore, the Allied strategic bombing campaign, though its effects on tank production per se are debated, forced the catastrophic dispersal of German industry, crippled the ball bearing and synthetic oil industries, and placed immense, ultimately fatal strain on the transportation of raw materials like coal, steel, and most critically, oil. And oil was the lifeblood of the Panzers. Every Panther that guzzled fuel on a 100-mile road march, or every Tiger that had to be moved by rail because its tracks would wear out on long journeys, consuming precious rail capacity, represented a direct drain on Germany's most critical strategic shortfall. In WW2, Germany was fighting a war of quality against a coalition of quantity, but it was also, foolishly, fighting a war of complexity and precision against a world of simplicity and robustness. The mathematical and logistical inevitability was crushing. The sheer volume of Allied production wasn't just about having more tanks. It meant having more of everything, more trucks to supply them, more shells to feed their guns, more trained, if not always veteran, crews to man them. Germany's investment in a few superb instruments left its orchestra understaffed and out of tune. The culmination of this philosophy of extremity was the Panzer VI Orff. B, the Tiger II or Königstiger, the King Tiger, weighing in at a staggering 69 tons, protected by up to 180 of sloped frontal armor on the turret, and armed with the monstrous long 88 kW K-43 gun. It was the apex predator of the tank world, a product of pure, uncompromising specification. In a static head-on engagement, it was virtually invulnerable to any Allied tank gun. Its gun could destroy a Sherman, T-34, or even a Soviet IS-2 tank at distances far beyond effective retaliation. When it appeared on the battlefields of Normandy in the summer of 1944 and on the Eastern Front, it caused terror. A few well-placed King Tigers, like those of SS Heavy Panzer Battalion 501, could hold up entire Allied advances, their frontal armor shrugging off round after round. But the Tiger II was the ultimate, grotesque expression of the German disease. It was so heavy it broke down constantly. Its overstressed 700-horsepower Maybach engine and overmatched transmission were chronic failures. The final drive, a persistent weakness in German heavies, was even more prone to failure. It was so wide it could barely use standard European roads or bridges, limiting its tactical mobility. Moving it by rail was a logistical ordeal requiring special flat cars. Only 492 were ever built. They were mechanical liabilities, strategic parasites on a dying body. Each one consumed the resources, man-hours, and special steels that could have built multiple Panthers, or, more effectively, dozens of Sturmgeschütz III assault guns, arguably Germany's most cost-effective armored vehicle of the war. Their tactical achievements, though sometimes spectacular, were irrelevant in the face of the overarching strategic reality of 1944-45. The Western Allies had landed in France with an unstoppable material advantage and absolute air dominance, and the Soviets were launching massive, army group-level offensives like Operation Bagration that shattered entire German fronts in weeks. A battalion of King Tigers might blunt a local attack, create a defensive Schwerpunkt asterisk, but it could not be everywhere. Meanwhile, thousands of Shermans and T-34-85s, supported by clouds of fighter bombers and endless, crushing artillery barrages, would simply flow around these isolated strongpoints, cross rivers elsewhere, and encircle them. The King Tiger was a monument, a final, defiant scream of an engineering culture that believed a perfect, technically superior weapon could change the fundamental arithmetic of a lost war. It was the wrong tool, perfected for a war that had long since moved past the narrow set of problems it was designed to solve. It was a solution to the tactical equation of 1943, deployed in the strategic collapse of 1944. To understand why building these tanks led to loss, we must move from the technical data sheets and the isolated kill ratio anecdotes to the harsh, holistic realities of the battlefield ecosystem of WW2. German big tanks excelled in specific, controlled conditions. Long-range defensive stands in open country, like the fields of Normandy or the Russian steppe. German tank commanders, often veterans with immense experience, knew how to leverage their superior optics and high-velocity guns to engage from distances of 1,500 to 2,000 meters, where they could hit but not be hit. In these moments, they racked up incredible scores, but WW2 was not a sniper's duel. The war was decided by relentless, grinding offensives, by deep operational encirclements, by the capture of key cities, rail hubs, and supply nodes. In the advance, or more commonly in the desperate retreats of 1944-45, The weaknesses of the big cats were crippling. Their poor operational mobility and fragility meant they lagged behind faster, more reliable mediums like the late-model Panzer IV, or were simply abandoned on the roadside. The Allied dominance in the air, especially after 1943, created a hellish environment for all German armor, but the heavies were particularly vulnerable. The fighter bomber, the American P-47 Thunderbolt or the British Hawker Typhoon, armed with rockets, bombs, and cannon, became the great equalizer. A stranded Tiger or King Tiger, trapped in a traffic jam, waiting for a bridge repair, or simply moving in daylight, was a sitting duck for a pilot with rockets. No amount of thick frontal armor could protect its thin top deck from a bomb or rocket strike, or its vulnerable engine deck from cannon fire. Furthermore, the Allies adapted tactically. They learned not to duel the big cats head-on in open country. In Normandy, Sherman units, despite the visceral fear of the Tiger and Panther, developed tactics using artillery and air strikes to suppress German positions, while mobile groups of Shermans and infantry would flank through the dense *bocage hedgerows to hit the more vulnerable German infantry, supply columns, and tank sides. The famous 5 Shermans for 1 Panther was less a hard ratio and more a tactical doctrine. One Sherman would engage to draw fire, while others maneuvered for a killing flank shot. The Soviets perfected deep battle operations, where breakthroughs by masses of T-34s would bypass German strongpoints and Schwerpunkts altogether, leaving even the mighty King Tigers stranded in tactical cul-de-sacs, their power irrelevant as the strategic front collapsed 50 miles behind them. The big German tanks were like castles, formidable when approached directly, but ultimately static, immobile, and bypassable in a war of movement. And in the brutal, close-quarter fighting in cities like Stalingrad, Warsaw, or the hedgerows of Normandy, their size, poor turret traverse, and limited ammunition capacity became severe liabilities. A humble Panzerfaust-wielding infantryman in a ruin or a bazooka team in a hedgerow could kill a King Tiger from the side or rear. The battlefield of WW2 was a system of combined arms, and Germany's overinvestment in one spectacular, resource-intensive component, the heavy tank, dramatically weakened all the others. There were never enough infantry, never enough trucks, never enough aircraft to support these steel giants properly. The Panzer divisions of 1944 were shadows of their 1940 selves, with depleted grenadier battalions and horse-drawn supply columns trying to keep pace with the fuel-hungry Panthers. The human and logistical dimension is perhaps the most damning indictment of the entire philosophy. A Tiger or Panther required a highly trained, cohesive crew of 5 to operate it effectively. As the war dragged on, these experienced men became irreplaceable casualties. The replacement crews, often hastily trained boys from the Hitler Youth or men combed out from the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine, lacked the skill to mitigate the tanks, mechanical frailties, or employ complex tactical maneuvers. The loss of a 5-man Tiger crew, with thousands of hours of combined experience, was a greater blow to the Panzerwaffe than the loss of the tank itself. Logistically, the big cats were vampires on a supply system already in terminal collapse. Their need for specialized spare parts, unique final drives, specific engine components, special road wheels, created a nightmare for the already overstretched German supply system. Disabled Panther might wait weeks for a new final drive to be shipped from Germany, while a damaged T-34 or Sherman could be patched up at a field workshop or even cannibalized from other wrecks and returned to the front in days. The German recovery vehicles, often underpowered conversions of old Panzer III or IV chassis, struggled to tow the immense weight of a disabled Tiger. The famous Bergepanther was excellent. But there were never enough of them. More often than not, when a big cat broke down or threw a track during a retreat, it had to be destroyed by its own crew with a thermite charge, a total, irrecoverable loss of a colossal investment of resources and labor. This contrasted starkly with the Soviet and American systems, which prioritized recovery and repair. The Sherman, in particular, was famous for being brought back to life repeatedly. The U.S. Army's recovery and repair services were a marvel of organized efficiency. This difference in recuperability multiplied the numerical advantage of the Allies. In WW2, Germany was not just outproduced, it was outsustained, outmaintained, and outlogisticized. Every complex tank it built was a future logistical burden, a future breakdown, a future abandonment. The very design choices that made them powerful and precise on a test range made them fragile and high maintenance in the chaotic, resource-starved, and increasingly desperate reality of the later war years. The German soldier, for all his tactical prowess, was ultimately let down by a system that gave him a magnificent but unsustainable weapon. Ultimately, the story of Germany's big tanks in WW2 is a profound tragedy of misapplied genius and strategic blindness. It was a catastrophic failure to understand that war, especially a global total war, is not won by having the best individual weapon, but by having the most effective, resilient, and adaptable system asterisk. The Allied system in WW2 was holistic and synergistic. It integrated mass production, global logistics, strategic air power, naval supremacy, intelligence breakthroughs like Ultra, and vast reserves of manpower into a machine that could absorb staggering losses and keep grinding forward. The Soviet system was brutally, ruthlessly focused on a few key, effective weapons produced in staggering numbers, backed by deep reserves of human courage and a willingness to sacrifice that the Nazi state, for all its terror, could never genuinely demand of its people without collapse. The German system, particularly after the shock of 1941, became increasingly lopsided, paranoid, and delusional. It bet on technological silver bullets to compensate for strategic depth and industrial shortfalls. The V-2 rocket, the Me-262 jet fighter, the Type XXI Electroboot U-boat, and the heavy tanks were all manifestations of this desperate last-ditch hope that wonder weapons could reverse irreversible strategic trends, break the enemy's will, or buy time for a political miracle. But weapons don't win wars. Systems, economies, and societies do. A Tiger tank was a subsystem within the larger German war machine. By demanding so much high-quality steel, so much precious fuel, so much skilled labor, so much maintenance bandwidth, it weakened every other subsystem it was connected to. It left the infantry undersupplied, the Luftwaffe starved of resources and pilots, the logistics in perpetual shambles, and the civilian economy crumbling. The pursuit of qualitative perfection in a vacuum, driven by tactical panic and ideological hubris, led directly to strategic bankruptcy. In the end, the charred, silent hulks of tigers and panthers littering the roads from the Falaise Gap to the Silo Heights, from the Ardennes to the streets of Berlin, are the most eloquent testimony. They were not defeated because they were inferior machines. In a sterile, one-on-one comparison on a flat plane, they were often superior. They were defeated because the war they were built for, a war of discrete, decisive armored duels decided by technical specifications, was a fantasy. The real WW2 was a war of nations, of factories, of oil fields, of railways, of manpower pools, of national will. It was a war won by the side that could produce not the perfect tank, but enough good enough tanks, enough trucks, enough planes, enough shells, and enough boots to keep relentless, simultaneous pressure on every front until the enemy's entire economic, political, and military system collapsed. Germany's obsession with building the biggest, most fearsome tanks was a symptom of its fundamental refusal to engage in that kind of total, industrial war until it was far too late. It was a tactical solution, born of fear and pride, pursued as a strategic panacea. And so, despite the awe they inspired and the terror they caused, these magnificent, over-engineered beasts rolled off the production lines and into history, not as instruments of victory, but as colossal steel monuments to a profound and fatal misunderstanding of the very nature of modern, total war. They were the best tanks on the battlefield, in the war that Germany, by the very choices that created these monsters, was destined to lose.